Hi, everybody. Once again, welcome to the Catholic Skeptic. In this video, we're going to spend a little time dealing with the question of the problem of evil. And this is partly in a response that I gave to Nate W., who had commented a few times on here, and he had made a particular comment regarding just something else I was talking about in I think it was the second video, and I made some comments regarding the problem of evil question, or just about suffering or something like that, and I guess I made the statement, well, I don't know, and he said, well, that's where you should have stopped, and kind of a little bit sarcastically, chiding me on that, which is fine. But I did respond on the comments back to him that I will do a video on the problem of evil, and so this is it. Another comment, though, that Nate, you made that I want to kind of address with this, because it sort of gave me he had made so many, I think three at least full comments about some different things. You made a kind of a little bit of a sarcastic remark about, well, you said to me, you seem to be unhappy unless there's meaning. And you said meaning seems to be really important to you. And when you said that, it made me think, are you a nihilist? Is that your perspective? Because honestly, everything we believe affects our worldview, affects everything that we do, and that's fine. That's a perfectly legitimate position to take. I'm just curious, for those who might be watching who don't know, a nihilist is someone who believes that there is no objective meaning to life, that there is that all commandments, morals, ethics are they're meaningless. There's no objective standard for any of those things. We have them, we use them, we can apply them, but life is basically meaningless and hopeless. I find that a very, personally, a very, kind of bleak, dark, and hopeless philosophy. Sometimes when you're younger, it's more fun. Well, and I have no clue what the age are of anyone who's making comments on here, but, just young and partying, hanging out, and life is just so hopeless and meaningless, whatever. But when you get older, when you raise kids and things like that, for example, I can't imagine teaching children that. They're already growing up in a world that's pretty crazy, and then you're going to have to tell them, oh, it's all meaningless anyway. I think meaning does matter. So yeah, for me, meaning does matter a lot. I believe it's central to my worldview. But if you are a nihilist, then you would believe that it doesn't. And an atheist in general. Now again, I'm not going to paint a broad stroke, because I got a lot of different comments from people about, referencing like an atheist who believes in ghosts. So yes, atheists can believe. I don't want to put anybody in any pigeonholes as far as what they may or may not believe. But many of the serious atheists who've done a lot of writing in that tend to be materialists, and materialism, I would assume, would go probably well with nihilism. If you're a materialist, if any person is a materialist, then you look at everything from that perspective. Again, you look at the world around you, everything you know, everybody you know, and even ourselves, and say that we are nothing but the products of a blind mechanical process. That we're the development of life over time has brought us to where we are, and that's it. It's just evolution is a blind mechanical process, and we're here. And if you go farther, and this is why I said earlier in the earlier video, I like to go all the way down the rabbit hole of an atheist materialistic perspective, and see it fully. If that's the case, then everything we're thinking and speaking, right now what I'm doing is nothing more than neurons firing in my brain. Now, yes, my thoughts are neurons firing in my brain. I believe in neuroscience, and that is the process of thought. But is that all it is? Is there nothing behind that? Because the firing of neurons in the brain is a chemical reaction. That's what your brain does. It has chemical reactions. And if it's only chemical reactions, then we are at bottom, each of us, kind of a bottle of chemicals. Nothing but chemicals. And if we're just chemicals, then it really reduces the notion of meaning completely. That perspective, to me, is a dark perspective. It's not a perspective that has any way out of it. And so when you respond for me to respond to the question of the problem of evil, I have to say my problem with the problem of evil from someone from that perspective. How do you measure it? When you think about evil, of course, you have to think of its opposite, good. How do we measure good versus evil? What is the ultimate good? What is the ultimate evil? Some individuals like Alex O'Connor, the cosmic skeptic, whose videos I've watched, he says he prefers to use the term the problem of suffering, kind of reduce it along those lines, because people know what it means to suffer, and that's fine. But when we see the horrors of evil in the world, obviously, it's not just as simple as whether it feels bad to me or not. So these are things. Now, as I said, when I made the comment about I don't know, I was referring to more of a personal sort of a situation. If you're comforting someone who's going through a death or a loss, as I happen to actually be doing right now in my life with a friend of mine, I don't always know the ins and outs of that person's situation, or to put it maybe in a more generic terms, people have difficulty understanding, let's say, why Aunt Tilly died, but she was the sweetest, kindest person in the world. She died with such a horrible disease, whereas that rat bastard Uncle Willie, he lived till he was 98 and didn't care about anybody. Why is that happening? Well, those are personal types of situations where those kind of things occur. You're looking at individual circumstances. We have to look at the bigger picture, obviously, to understand, the problem of evil in the world and good or bad fortune in life, circumstances, all of those things. And so it's a worthwhile, question to investigate, to look into. And so I want to spend some time doing that in this video. So let's come back, shift over to my own view for the Catholic Christian perspective. From that perspective, of course, we believe that God created the universe, all right? That God is behind the evolutionary process, that he's behind creation, that God is not the supreme being as in a chain of beings, but God is being. He's necessary being, to use the theological term, whereas you and I are contingent beings. God, I like to say it this way, God doesn't exist, God is existence. There's a verse in the Bible that says, in him we live and move and have our being, have our existence. We exist in God. And so God created nature. God designed the world. God is the creator. In fact, I think the evidence of evolution is very much a real thing. I don't dispute evolution in terms of that, but the physical evidence of evolution, all of the things that point to the evolutionary process, don't always point to all of the specifics. Now, I know right away the dogmatic evolutionists out there might be watching this and saying, well, natural selection. The whole point of natural selection is that there's no God behind it. Species adapt and survive and reproduce and therefore survive and last, or they don't, and there's nobody behind it. It's not like artificial selection, like the breeding of dogs or something like that. This is natural selection. But that whole idea is still man's projection into the process. Just as, of course, obviously mine could be as well, but no, I think that there's more behind it. I think the complexity of nature, all of the things involved, speak to something behind it, something real. That God is the creator. But once I say that, the moral question enters in right away, and that is, what about the problem of evil? Why is the world the way it is? Well, from the Catholic Christian perspective, we believe the world is out of whack. That there was something, human beings are a fallen species, that there was a fall, that there was something that changed in creation, and that's why it is the way it is. That's why the world looks the way it looks. We believe in something called original sin. Now, the book of Genesis expresses this poetically as the partaking of the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That doesn't necessarily mean it was literally somebody biting a tree, biting a piece of fruit, an apple. We never identify as an apple. But it's the idea that at some point in the human species, in the past, the human species rebelled against God in that manner and just took on the knowledge of good and evil. That notion of we will decide things, not God, and that's why the world is the way it is. Now, I'm just simply proposing this is the theological position. You can laugh at it, mock it, be intrigued by it, confused by it, dismiss it, whatever. But this is the position. That the world is out of whack, that there's the distortion of the world. Human beings, for example, as I've said in an earlier video, I believe human beings are image bearers of God. We created in the image of God, we bear his image. But human beings also can be nasty people. Wickedness is done. There's all kinds of things because we're a flawed, fallen species. All right. That's why, human beings, for example, have amazing creative powers. We create all kinds of things, but it's always got that distortion. All right. So, human beings created penicillin and human beings created heroin. All right. Human beings make cell phones and nuclear bombs. George Carlin's, the comedian George Carlin's routine, humans make silly putty and napalm. All right. Both are always there. They're always present. There's always that sense of distortion to everything, You can think of an old song like Louis Armstrong, I say to myself, what a beautiful world, and you look at the beauty of nature and think it's amazing, but then there's also earthquakes and underwater earthquake tsunamis, and tornadoes and hurricanes and landslides and floods and horrendous weather conditions, all sorts of patterns in this world that make the universe a very, maybe beautiful in some ways, but a very dangerous place. But in specific realities of living on Earth, why is the world that way? We believe that that's all connected. That this original sin. Interesting. G.K. Chesterton said that original sin is the one Christian doctrine for which there is, in fact, empirical evidence. And he did most of what he wrote with a somewhat tongue-in-cheek approach, but he said you just look at everybody you know, and if you have the courage to look at yourself and deeply, human beings are selfish people, self-centered people, egotistical people. Arguments fueled by pride and hurt feelings and wanting to show someone else up, our competitiveness, everything about us, that there's an edge to it all that exists that way. Original sin doesn't just mean, from the let's say Protestant perspective of Christianity would be, that human beings are just depraved in every sense of the word, but rather that there's it's always distorted. There's always a distortion in life and how we look at things. And learning virtues like humility, being teachable, those things don't come easy, and it has made the world a mess in many ways. Still beautiful, yet still a mess. And so there are heroes in life. There are artists and creators and scientists who've accomplished great things, and there are horrible examples of wickedness. Not just murderers but mass murderers, all kinds of things. I believe that the reason for that is because the world is in sin. The world is in rebellion against God. That's why that's the case. That there is a definitive good and evil. There is a definitive standard, and it's been violated. And yes, part of it is the free will of man. Now, whenever you bring up that one, I know many times. A quick response that a lot of atheists and different skeptics have had, which I had to at one time, is, well, okay, that's fine as far as crime, let's say, or genocide or war, but what about people dying in a tsunami, people dying in an earthquake or a hurricane? Then it's just nature. Humans didn't specifically cause that, but it happened. The principle is, though, that everything is distorted, everything is out of whack. The world is in a distorted condition, and that there is a level of responsibility humans have with each other and to care for each other, and that God does even use some of these evil things to bring about good. Again, you learn things through suffering. You go through things suffering, and again, I know some people commented, well, that's just certainly God could have found a better way to people learn things. Sure, there's any number of ways it could have gone, but honestly, that is one of the benefits of age. Now, of course, I'm in my 50s. Somebody else among right there. You do find out. You do learn great things from suffering. You learn from a lot of experiences. And if you and the longer you're at, sometimes you see how they turn around or what meaning came out of them. Again, show me someone that hasn't suffered much. I'll show you someone that often doesn't love that much. You develop compassion because you've gone through things yourself many times. So these are all a part of that too. And there's also that strange dimension in the human species, which I don't think can develop just from the species evolving, and that is conscience. Why do we have a conscience? That simple sense of not just the survival instinct, let's say. Like all other species, we have a survival instinct. We have a fight or flight instinct in us. Our limbic system reacts to certain things. There are aspects of in our brain that battle one another. The amygdala, where those fear and emotions and different things build up, versus the prefrontal cortex and the management of thoughts. There's all of those things in the human species, but there's also that sense of conscience. Again, that sense of, I'd mentioned it, and I know Nate also commented about that. Well, you reference bravery and different things. Yes, it is an amazing thing when people are willing to lay down their life for others, not just loved ones. Of course, as a parent, my parental instinct might kick in, and I might lay down my life for my children without thinking about it. But would I do it for strangers? Would I do it for a cause or a principle greater than myself? Those who would fight for freedom, those who would help save others and risk their lives so that others could be all right, and go get into a firefight, into a battle, and willing to risk life and limb. That is something, I believe is there because God put it in us, that there is that consciousness, there's that awareness. But where the original sin comes in is that principle of deciding myself what's good or evil, what should I do, and how should I handle this? How selfish or shouldn't I be? Now, God's remedy, from the Catholic Christian perspective, was to redeem the world. God began by giving us law and giving us putting consciousness in us in a sense of good and evil, giving us his law, sending his prophets, and ultimately by God becoming one of us, by God becoming a man in the person of Jesus Christ. That's the central Catholic Christian doctrine, that God became a man, that eternity entered into time, that spirit wedded with matter. God entered into human history and became one of us and lived on this earth and set the example in the person of Jesus. Lived that ideal holy life that most people, and some don't believe Jesus ever existed, which I still think is a ridiculous thing, and I will do a video at some point on that too. But for those who do it, is admirable, and yet at the same time, the Jesus of the Bible, the Jesus of the Gospels, claimed to be God, claimed to be divine, and claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life, and yet lived this idyllic holy life that makes even some psychologists portray him as like the ideal person or whatever, the ideal example of good. And that Jesus died for us and paid the price for sin and shed his blood and rose from the dead alive and victorious, those basic Christian doctrines, to redeem us. And so that he can take evil and make good out of it and change the course of things. And of course, the impact of Christ in history did create major changes. Although there were plenty of morality principles in philosophy and other ancient cultures and around the world, absolutely, no doubt. In fact, the Bible actually tells us that Jesus Christ is the light that lights every man that comes into the world, that the light of God affects every man's conscience in every form, in every way. Anything you could find good in Taoism or in Buddhism or in, even some of the most seemingly primitive cultures that have principles in there and wisdom and understanding, many of the moral lessons of mythology, everything, it all speaks to it. But the reality that God has something he's doing in this whole thing, that is working out in our lives. And of course, fully speaking, to kind of try to give a synopsis of it, just to a summation of it. The ultimate, of course, is that Jesus Christ is coming again. To quote the Nicene Creed, he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. And of his kingdom there will be no end. That he will bring judgment and ultimate justice, and the justice will come. So whatever has gone on, whatever evil has been done, yes, there will be justice. There will be a day of reckoning. There will be a reckoning for these things. And that he himself will remake the earth at that point. And God knows, we know how many human beings have had idyllic ideas for making the earth that have sometimes turned into what started out as a utopian fantasy into a dystopian nightmare. So we want to understand that distinction too. When people take those things unto themselves. To quote, or not quote, but really, reference Dostoevsky when he, put into the words of Ivan Karamazov and the brothers Karamazov, when you stop believing in God, anything's permissible. And people have done all kinds of things in the name of good. In fact, some of the greatest evils on a massive scale have been done by people doing it in the name of good, in the name of a very ecstatic philosophy. We think of someone like a Stalin, for example. Stalin was an incredibly prolific writer and quite educated and quite intellectual. And I happen to have done a certain amount of Russian history when I was in college. So, I was amazed at some of this. And he would have given you extensive arguments, and his mentor, Vladimir Lenin, would have been more so extensive, seemingly very moral motivations for doing immoral things. The end justifies the means, that principle. So yes, evil can be done oftentimes with the best of intentions. But again, if we make up the standard, that's what always seems to happen. And so that principle is there, and understanding that principle is there. We have inside of us this sense of consciousness, the sense of right and wrong. I believe that has a lot to do with it. We all appeal to it. We all appeal to a standard, even if we say we have no standard. I've seen videos of street preachers. Evangelical street preachers, for example, preaching, and the hecklers in the streets will often say the same thing. The Bible's full of slavery. The Bible's full of genocide. The Bible justifies slavery, genocide, and all kinds of wicked things. How can you preach the Bible? But if you ask those individuals what they believe about morality, most of them would tell you they don't believe there is an objective morality. So there's no objective morality, but now I'm going to judge the Bible because of its immoralness. That's a difficulty. Because who's setting the standard? Well, I'm setting it myself. I'm just going by my own evaluation. Well, that's fine. We can do that. But with 7 billion people on the planet and 7 billion different perspectives on morality, that wouldn't, what we make up on our own isn't going to cut it. And yet there does run through humanity and conscience certain principles that are universal, that are everywhere. Principles of integrity, principles of honesty. And I think these things all speak to the same principle. They all come back, rather circle about to the same idea that there is something that should be right, that all of us have a sense in us of the way something ought to be versus the way it is. And a desire to make things the way it ought to be. So hence the word progressive. I want to progress towards something. If there's something that should be better than it is, let's make it better. That's the same principle. But if you introduce the kind of hopelessness into it, then it becomes another question entirely. And sometimes that can be done with a very great emotional strain. Think of John Lennon and imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Well, actually, a lot of people have fulfilled that, especially in the last maybe 40 or 50 years. And when people just live for today, they don't suddenly become filled with brotherly love. Usually they become filled with self-centeredness. If there's nothing to kill or die for, then there's nothing to live for either. If there's nothing higher or greater than myself to strive for, think of it in those terms. The automatic premise isn't let's all share. No possessions. It's easy if it's no, people want possessions. People desire things of their own. Little kids learn mine really fast. Do they need to be taught to share? Sure. But again, why? Because you could argue from a nihilistic or anything perspective. Let the strong survive. Let the weak die. Let the strong dominate. That might be nature's course. And societies have tried things like that. It always ends in a horrendous situation. So these are realities that we look at when we think about the Catholic Christian worldview and why I hold to that, let's say, and not to the other. That there is meaning, that there is genuine meaning, that meaning does matter. Even an atheist like Friedrich Nietzsche, said, you can bear almost any how if you have a why. You can bear almost any situation if there's a why. Why am I doing this? Why am I enduring this? Any circumstance I'm going through, if there's a why behind it, if there's a reason for it. And if I've just made up the reason, or perceive I've just made up the reason, it's not going to be much of a reason. But again, the only way I think we ever learn to not think we're better than everybody else or is humility of recognizing we believe in someone or something greater than ourselves. And hence that's where it comes back again to the principle of God. And so ultimately, I believe when it comes to the question of the problem of evil, we have to ask ourselves, well, if there's a problem of evil, it's because there's also a problem of good, or a purpose of good maybe. And I have a battle between good and evil, and that there is a necessity that good be what we pursue and not evil. And that it does matter. Again, people say there's no absolutes, and of course my sarcastic response is always the same. That's an absolute statement. Just as I shared earlier, shared in I think maybe the first video about the term agnostic. Agnostic means you put an A in front of something. It means no knowledge. Agnosis, no knowledge. The Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. And a genuine classical agnostic doesn't just say they don't know if there's a God. They say you can't know. To which, of course, I respond, how do you know that? How can you know you can't know something? How do you know something can't be known? Why? That understand why hold to such a position? The Christian Catholic worldview allows for a very specific understanding of why there is evil in the world. Yes, God does permit things, and I don't know detailing. I understand, let's just say, the details of why certain things happen or why certain kinds of sufferings take place. But I know that my concern, my compassion for those who are suffering, my desire to help them, my desire to alleviate suffering, my desire to make things better, comes out of a belief that there is a standard, and that standard is the God that I believe in, and that he has manifested himself in the person of Jesus Christ and demonstrated in lead and action by taking part in our world and by taking part in what we go through, the reality of what life is like, and has set that standard. And because of that example and that understanding, it's more meaningful to be compassionate. It's more meaningful to do something. It's more meaningful to not lose hope. because my trust isn't in the fickle heart of man, humanity, forgive me for not gender neutral, let's say humanity, but rather, in the heart of God, and the recognition of God as he's been revealed in Christ for me, which I believe is the fullness of that revelation. But as C.S. Lewis once pointed out, he says, if you believe that one religion, let's say, or one particular understanding of God is right, it doesn't mean you believe all the rest are all necessarily wrong altogether. In mathematics, there are some answers that are closer than others. And as I said, there's truth in all religions. There's truth in various philosophies. There's all kinds of things. I for one, have learned much from Taoism. I think the Tao Te Ching is an amazing book. I've learned tremendous things from that. There are principles I've learned from the Stoics, and the Stoic writings are, again, they're just an amazing thing. Read the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. Amazing. This is a guy who's a Roman emperor, but yet he had a tremendous insight and philosophical understanding. And is, of course, very similar in some respects to biblical understanding and to Christian understanding, even though he saw the Christians in his day and was, I believe, historically less likely to a persecutor of them than some of the other emperors were. It came and went during those first few centuries of Christianity, during the time of Roman rule. But I mean, there's all sorts of understandings that come from things. And gaining that is so vital. I've learned from atheists. I've learned from people who have insight into all sorts of things. There's principles that are there that are bounding. There's wisdom around us we can always tap into. But I believe that exists because God exists, and that it is something that's real and definitive. It's not something that's just either a human construct or just emerging from a blind mechanical process of evolution. I believe God is behind evolution. And I believe that's why things have become, like I said, extending something in time doesn't, to me, take away any of the magic from it, or any of the wonder of it, any of the beauty of it, any of the miraculous from it. My fundamentalist friends who would say, no, it's literal, Genesis is a literal 24 hours and the earth's only 6,000 years old, beyond the fact that there's no scientific evidence for that. It doesn't take away from the power of creation. If I understand that the development of life wasn't so long. Again, if the Earth is 4 point whatever billion years old, and why have only humans have been around for maybe 100,000 years on Earth if they're so important? That's God's choice. Again, that's just a moral judgment on God. That's not a determination of anything. A lot of times the questions that are posed along those lines are just attempts to, make the moral question a huge quagmire you can't get through. I don't think it's that complicated. I think that there's a whole lot more that's real there. And we'll explore that more in future videos. But I wanted to sort of just kind of go along those lines. But I hope maybe I've answered, at least from my perspective, what, the problem of evil looks like from a Catholic Christian perspective. Again, I'm not saying you have to believe it. You might say it's nonsense, but laugh me out of the room. That's fine, but that's the standard. That's the principle. Again, in a small summation of it, not the levels as. But as we go in future videos, we may take some of those out and go farther along as we go. But in the meantime, again, I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope that that this is helpful for anybody who's watching right now, a Christian and Catholic, a theist and atheist, an agnostic, a nun. What is that popular term now? People who simply have no religious affiliation but don't think about it. I hope you have thought about it. One of the things I greatly admire about atheists is that they think hard about these issues to come to determinations, where sometimes people who are sort of theists don't really think about it at all. We need to think deeply about all these things and these questions because they do matter. And I hope that, I want people to stay skeptical and investigate things, but turn your skepticism toward skeptical thinking too. Turn toward all those different areas and investigate and look for answers, because I think there are answers and we will find them. So until next time, have a good one, everyone. And again, please keep the comments coming in, hit like and subscribe, and ask questions, make comments, take this apart and criticize it. That's fine too. Looking forward to it. That's great. Dialogue, interact. If you agree, let me know as well. Keep watching. All right. It's been fun. Thanks.